Great. Hello and welcome. I'm so delighted to have you here for this National Pathways event. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Buckley. I'm the Chief of Staff for Carol Schwartz and the CEO of the Trawalla Foundation. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the traditional lands from which we are zooming in tonight. I work and live on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. First Nations women have been leading their communities and spearheading change for tens of thousands of years, and we have so much to learn from their wisdom and current leadership. And I wanted to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women here with us this evening. I wanted to open the session by congratulating the 5 alum who ran in the recent New South Wales state election. It takes tremendous courage and hard work to step into the political arena, and we're just so proud of your efforts. And a huge and particular congratulations also to Mary Doyle on her election to the Victorian seat of Aston. It's tremendous to see Mary make history as the first woman to hold the seat since its creation. And Mary's achievement takes our Pathways electoral successes to 29. A meaningful result and just the beginning of what we hope to see in the coming years. In saying that, I wanted to remind you all that applications for this year's Pathways program are open until the 1st of May in no less than 6 states and territories. We'd love for you to share this opportunity with your networks. Our best referrals always come from this community. Please think about a woman you know who might be ready for this, tap her on the shoulder and encourage her to apply. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the wonderful alum panel, which will be expertly facilitated by Dr Meredith Martin. I love these sessions where we get to hear from newly elected alum. It's always insightful and inspiring. So a big thank you to Sarah, Georgie and Gaelle for joining us this evening to share their reflections on campaigning and their first months in office. As always, the session will be recorded and we'll share it with our broader Pathways community. And at the end, there'll be the opportunity to ask some questions using the raise hand function. Meredith will be familiar to many of you. She is the wonderful Program Director for the University of Melbourne Pathways Program and a dear friend and colleague of mine. Meredith has held a number of academic and professional roles at the university and led a range of strategic partnerships and initiatives, including the establishment of the highly successful Media and Communications program at the University of Melbourne. She has presented and published widely on equity and access in the creative industries, and she is chair of the feminist artist-led organisation AFIDS, as well as board member of the Public Galleries Association of Victoria. And finally, Meredith has been deeply involved in Pathways since it was launched in 2015. And her leadership and passion for Pathways has been pivotal to our success. So a big thank you to you, Meredith. And over to you to have a fabulous conversation with our panel.
Thanks, Sarah. And right back at you, can I say, it's just, you're a joy to work with, as are your team. And I acknowledge Eloise and Ari for all their work on these fantastic alumni sessions, which we all love so much. And I know are very valuable to all our alum. Welcome, everyone. And it's so lovely to see some familiar faces. And as the faces were coming onto the call, I was lining them up with the different cohorts of our speakers. And so I know that there's some friends and fellow travellers in there tonight, which is fantastic. It's such a pleasure to be here and introduce you to those who haven't met them yet, to 3 alum from different sides of politics who've recently been elected to the same chamber in the Victorian Parliament, the Legislative Council. And I'd like to start by congratulating them on their success and also acknowledging our other 3 alum in the other chamber, the Legislative Assembly, who were returned for the second time in the recent Victorian election: Juliana Addison MP in Wendouree, Kat Theophanous MP in Northcote, and Bridget Valance MP in Evelyn. The core purpose of tonight's session is to provide the opportunity for Pathways alum to directly learn from their peers. So with no further ado, I will now introduce our speakers. And as Sarah said, there will be time for questions after I've gone in with mine. Dr Sarah Mansfield is the state member for Western Victoria and the first Greens MP to represent that electorate. Prior to becoming a member of Parliament, Sarah worked as a general practitioner and served as a councillor for the City of Greater Geelong between 2017 and 2022. Welcome, Sarah. Georgie Purcell is the Animal Justice Party state member for Northern Victoria. Prior to entering Parliament, Georgie worked as a digital campaigner at United Voice, a communications advisor, and as Chief of Staff to Andy Meddick MP. Georgie is a lawyer, a passionate animal protection advocate and promoter of young women's representation in elected office, of which she is one, of course. Gaelle Broad is the National State Member for Northern Victoria. Gaelle grew up in a third-generation farm in the Yarra Valley and lives in Bendigo with her husband and 3 children. Prior to entering Parliament, Gaelle managed a team at one of Australia's largest regional banks. She's worked in local, state and federal government, including in the office of former Federal Treasurer Peter Costello MP and Nationals Senator Bridget McKenzie. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for making time in your very busy schedules for this session, and particularly to Sarah, who's taken time out of a trip to New Zealand to join us. So that's really paying it forward, I think. Okay, I want to kick things off by asking each of our panelists to dive right in and spend about 5 minutes each sharing what they have learned from their campaign experience. And I know that especially for Sarah and Gaelle, you have multiple campaign experiences, so you're very welcome to speak to them too. What worked, what didn't, and what you wished you'd known. Sarah, let's start with you.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you for that, Meredith and Sarah, for the lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to be back joining the Pathways group. I was saying earlier before all the audience came in, it's been, you know, it was such an important part, I think, of my political journey, and you know, it means a lot to be able to come back in this capacity and be part of it. Yeah, as Meredith said, this wasn't my first campaign. My first campaign was in 2016, which was also the first year of Pathways to Politics and the year I participated. And I was actually running that campaign at the same time as participating in the program. And I've run in 2 other campaigns. There were 2 other campaigns before the most recent one. So they were all very different. And I think in some ways, having been a candidate in multiple campaigns, certainly prepared me for some aspects of this recent one. The first time I ran as a federal candidate in a very unwinnable seat, and it was a really lovely experience, actually. There's not, you know, it really takes the pressure off, I think, knowing that you can't win, and so you're there just to do your best. You're there to fly the flag. It's a great way to get involved in the community. Great way to just get to build networks. I loved it, but you know, it was never a thought that I was running to win anything. Next time around, I was running for a local government campaign. I was actually really invested in that one because I genuinely wanted to be in local government, but really felt like it was an outside chance. But again, built on that previous experience, drew on all the networks that I'd sort of developed during that first campaign in 2017, did a lot of door knocking to build a lot of connections over about a 6-month period. It was intense, but was something I was really passionate about. Was elected, but it was somewhat of a surprise. That was to local government. Third time around, it was a weird campaign. It was COVID. I was an incumbent, and I actually felt a lot of pressure that time because something about, people know you're a known entity and you're putting yourself out there again. So I found that quite stressful, but was able to use the same techniques. In a local government campaign, you've got a fairly discrete area. and again, able to draw on those networks. And I sort of felt like I knew I knew the lay of the land by then. State government campaign, totally different for an upper house seat. It was something I was really, again, I'd reached that point where I was really passionate about. It wasn't something I'd always coveted, but I was getting frustrated at local government level with a number of things, and I felt like, no, I want to step up and into the state level, and there's some issues in my region I'd really love to address. So I had the motivation, which really helps. I think if you're really motivated, it helps you push through all the hard bits, and it helps you do all the tough stuff around campaigning. But I wasn't prepared for, I think, how difficult it is in a massive geographical area to, you're not able to control everything yourself. Like, you cannot physically cover that much territory yourself, or with the, you know, maybe the stronger networks you might have built around you. You need to, you need to rely on a lot of people further afield to do a lot of work, and that's hard. And it's hard to just trust that things are happening elsewhere, because you cannot micromanage an entire area that big yourself. And that was something I found really quite challenging. But the techniques a lot of them are the same with campaigning. It's, you know, building networks, and you just have to get out there, build a network that can then, and build capacity within that network to do your work for you. There's still a lot of phone calls, a lot of text messages, a lot of trying to raise funds. It was different because of the scale of it, and because of the amount of capacity building you had to do, and amount of trust you had to have in other people. But the lessons learned from previous campaigns were still applicable to a large degree. I think it was still easier in the areas where I had previously built those networks. So the Geelong area, I felt very comfortable with. I had a good network there, was able to mobilise those people again, and I was able to control it a bit myself, you know, be involved.
And I guess you were known too.
Yeah, I was known, so it made it much easier. Whereas you're not known over a bigger area, like you can't rely on that. And adding on top of that, in the Victorian system, you're subject to this group, you know, the group voting system, group voting ticket system, which adds an element of, unless you're in a major party high up on a ticket, really adds an element of luck to it. You don't know how all of that's going to play out, how the different deals and calculations will work. And certainly in the position I was in, I knew that we were really relying on a strong primary vote. Like, that was, you know, there wasn't really anything else I could, you know, there wasn't anything else I could control beyond that. So that added a real, element of luck. And I suppose the other thing that I found I definitely wasn't prepared for was, and because my seat was incredibly close, that 2-week wait between the end of the election, like, you put your heart and soul into this campaign, and then I literally had to wait till they pressed the button after 2 weeks of counting to find out the result. And I don't know, I think I didn't appreciate how stressful that would be. I thought it would be something you just kind of, and at some philosophical level I'd gone, okay, well, it'll be what it'll be, but I don't think I was prepared for how stressful it is going through that, where a button push will totally change the trajectory of a life. I had patients, I wasn't sure if I returned to a counsellor job. I just kind of, everything was up in the air until that button was pushed.
I can only imagine. I mean, look, I was getting OCD checking the results for that one that ran, so I can only imagine what it was like for you.
It's terrible.
and I think also there's a lot of people don't understand those issues of scale with the upper house. You know, I think that it's a really different kettle of fish. So it is interesting to and I think, Gaelle, too, you can speak to that, because you've run for the Legislative Assembly previously too, haven't you? Over to you, Gaelle. What worked for you, what didn't, and what you wish you'd known?
Yeah, no, thank you, and hello everybody, and hopefully the audio is still working fine.
It's still working. It's all good.
All nods, that's great. Look, Sarah, it's excellent to kind of hear your story, because I think mine is so similar in many ways as far as previous elections and campaigns. But for me, I did stand for a vacancy in Northern Victoria. Funnily enough, the seat that I'm kind of holding now, almost there was a vacancy when Damien Drum moved across to Shepparton in the federal. So that was a pre-selection, and I lost that pre-selection. But in 2018, I then stood as a candidate, as Meredith mentioned, in the Bendigo East, because I live close to Bendigo, so I'm in that electorate. That is against the Deputy Premier, which is pretty challenging, Jacinta Allen. And so I really enjoyed that process. And I guess similar to Sarah, it was kind of connecting with people and getting out there, and a very different style of campaign to the upper house. And then, yeah, I guess just as far as the lower house, it was things like car wraps and call flutes and lots of events, lots of media regularly. And then the upper house is such a massive area. I guess, as Sarah mentioned, it's like for Northern Victoria, it's 100,000 square kilometres. So we're talking nearly half of the state, and 540,000 people in that area. And I remember going to the MCG and looking at the audience and thinking, wow, I would have to walk around 9 times the MCG and meet every single person in this crowd to try and meet the same number of people voting at the election. And it really hit me, because I did try and sort of drive around hours and hours and hours in the car to reach different areas. Went to Mildura by train. I think it took me about 6 hours. So, I went down to the Yarra Valley area because it does stretch down to that as well. So you're doing a lot of travelling, but as you're passing through towns, I guess I kept thinking, I don't know this level of detail. Like for these local areas, they're passionate about their local areas. They've all got their own concerns. There's 11 lower house seats in the one Northern Victoria electorate. So it is, I guess, quite a different campaign, and probably something that I felt very strongly was the Nationals are such a team. There was great candidates in a number of those seats, and I guess for us, the outcome was really encouraging. After the election, we saw a majority of women in the Nationals party room, and that's the first time that's happened. So I feel like we're all
and in
sort
the upper house.
Yeah, that's right.
Right,
And in the upper house as well. So it's kind of like a double whammy there, which is great. But that was really good. But I think the quality of the candidates is just so important. And when I was in Shepparton, I like Kim O'Keefe, who's the candidate for the Nationals there. I think her first the results were coming in on election night, and I looked at the polling booths, and it was like she'd got 40% of the primary vote, and I was like, wow, that's very good, Kim. You just sort of think, yeah, she was just so well regarded, as were the other Nationals candidates across the board. So I guess I feel very grateful, because I feel being in the upper house now, it really is a result of the hard work of so many people. And I was at a members function the other evening, and you think, they're the grassroots, and we're constantly, reminded in the Nationals of just how, politics is local. Politics is about your local community, and so, yeah, people are definitely part of that. And what I've seen too in the MPs, the former MPs of the Nationals, is they don't go away like in a positive way, because they stay around. We had dinner together in Melbourne fairly recently, and they're sharing their stories and their experiences of being MPs, what worked well, what didn't work well for them, and I think that investment that they continue to make in future members, is incredible. So no, I guess there was quite a bit of a difference in that whole thing. And for me, I guess my interest in politics started many years ago. I was about 28 years ago. I did a state parliamentary internship. So I had actually been through the building before, which helps when you're trying to find your way around the corridors. But yeah, I just think that whole thing of don't give up if it's something you're interested in. And I know I was really enjoying my work role too, because I'd sort of given it a go in 2016, didn't get it, given it a go in 2018, and then a number of people were saying, well, will you run again, like for the Northern Victoria? And I thought, oh, I do really enjoy my job. I was, managing a team, loving it. But then I did have a dear friend say, if you don't try, you've always been interested. If you don't try, may never get this opportunity again. So I thought, okay, I'll give it one last go. And then I did have a number of Nationals members who were part of that sort of pre-selection process. They were so glad. They reminded me after the election, glad you gave it a last go, Gaelle, but like Sarah, I was never fully confident, I guess, of the outcome, because the Nationals person before me had, lost that position in the upper house. And so with the preference deals that are being done, you don't know. I'm not particularly happy with the upper house voting system, and there's been a bit of commentary on that, but I hope we see change in Victoria. But I was certainly waiting to see when that button was pressed, is it all happening? But I guess personally, I felt I couldn't have given it any more. So I knew I'd done my best, and I think that's all you can do. But I saw my husband's relief, I guess, with the outcome, and I thought, boy, he'd been carrying quite a load in that as well. So I think it does impact, a lot of people around you. But yeah.
Good on you, Gaelle. And I mean, there's a real theme emerging here already that, is something we talk a lot about in the program, as you all know, and that is just that persistence, keep that fire in the belly. Georgie, over to you.
Thanks, ma'am. I think it's worthwhile for me to say from the outset that I'm incredibly lucky and very privileged that I won the first time I ran a serious campaign. And it's always important for me to say that, because I think some people look at me and think it's as easy as it was for me. I mean, not that it was easy, but that's the real experience for a lot of people. And as we're hearing tonight, it's actually not. So I ran at the last election, obviously, and was successful. And my only other experience as a candidate was in 2014 at the state election, when I agreed to be a paper candidate at the very last minute in Northcote and literally didn't, do anything on it. So this was my real first go, and I'd been involved in the party, in the Animal Justice Party, for about 10 years by the time I ran as a candidate. So I was very familiar with election campaigns, but it is very, very different running one for yourself and being the person and being the one that I guess needs to be promoted and putting yourself out there, and also feeling the pressure that comes with that. I think what worked for me, as we've heard from Gaelle and Sarah, we all represent regional areas. Gaelle and I represent the same electorate. And as she mentioned, it's almost half of the state. And I'm lucky in the sense that I live smack bang in the middle of it. So I'm at a good location to get around. But I quickly learned, just like Gaelle, that and like Sarah, that I just couldn't be everywhere. And so I really relied heavily on digital for my campaign. That's something that really worked for me. And often when I was faced with the decisions of do you want to drive 5 hours to Mildura for one event, or is your time better spent setting up digital ads, scheduling your Facebook posts for the week, promoting yourself online? And then I still got to everywhere in the electorate throughout the campaign, but I really had to pack it all together to make the most of those trips, because it's just such an enormous region. And as others have mentioned, then I had to rely on others involved in the campaign to do the work for me and trust them to do it. Another thing that really worked for me was engaging young audiences. That's something that I really tried to rely on. Even though I represent a regional area, there's actually a significant young population coming through, especially in the area that I live in. And being a young MP myself, I'm 30 now, which I guess in the grand scheme of things of when you can participate in politics isn't that young, but I'm the youngest woman now in the Victorian Parliament. And I really want to show, I guess, young people that they could be excited and engaged and passionate about politics, and perhaps see someone that is like them running as a candidate. Something that worked for me as a candidate and continues to work for me as a politician now is being authentic and being myself. I refuse to act like politicians are expected to, I guess, in a way that's really polished and manufactured. And I'm not saying that everyone does that, but I really bring my whole self to the table when I'm talking to people online or in Parliament or constituents. And that's really important to me, because I think that being, just showing your personality and that you're a real person is something that's really important to change the perspective of politicians, and also, I guess, for people to want to engage in politics, that anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Something else that really worked for me, which can be very, very hard as a woman, and I'm terrible at, is asking for help. I was really, really bad at asking for help in the beginning, and people were coming to me and saying, what can I do for you? I'm really excited you're running. And I still had this guilt about asking people for favors, especially when it was, I had a really lovely bunch of older women in my electorate who couldn't really stand on their feet all day and hand out how to vote cards, but they were more than happy to drive 5 hours across the electorate to drop off how to vote cards to booths and corflutes and yard signs. So I really had to get used to asking people for help, and that worked for me. And what I wish I'd known is something that I think is really important, is things will absolutely go wrong during your campaign. Many things went wrong for me. I had an absolute how to vote card disaster where thousands of dollars of printing couldn't be used, and that it's okay to not do everything. I sort of touched on it before, but you really feel this immense pressure as a candidate where you're getting invited to forums and events and meetings. And I do want to really stress that it's important to be accessible. You're asking people to vote for you, and that's obviously a really great honor to get their vote, and you should be able to engage. They should feel the right to engage with you, but don't overcommit yourself. It's really easy to do. So I would have to find, sort of, I guess, compromises. So if someone wanted to meet me in a really regional area and I couldn't make it there, I'd always make sure I spoke to them on the phone or had an online meeting with them. Something that I just wanted to touch on as well throughout my campaign that I learned, that I wish I knew at the start and I learned, and it also works for me now, is that it's okay to not know everything. I think people look at candidates and politicians and think they have to have all the answers. And I really had to learn to say, I actually don't know about that. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm willing to learn, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. And I think it's really good at breaking down those barriers of showing people that you're a real person. You don't think you're better than them, and you actually don't have all the answers. And it's your job as their representative to learn about, or potential representative to learn about them. And just the other thing that I wish I had known was to take a break. I came to the end of that election campaign and I'd spent 4 years working in Parliament as well. And it was particularly difficult 4 years. And I absolutely was not prepared for the then onslaught that comes with getting elected. And I was just so exhausted. And I think in many ways in life...
I can see Sarah nodding here too.
I put far too much pressure on myself to go really hard. And, I've had to learn now, even as an MP, and I'm sure Gaelle and Sarah can relate to this, it's really hard to draw that boundary and say, no, actually, I'm going to take a break, particularly when you've got staff working for you and things like that, and you're in sort of the senior job in the office. It's a really great privilege. So please, if you're running a campaign in the future, take a break, because you're going to come back better. You're going to be more on it. You're going to be more refreshed, and you're actually going to, manage it better than you would if you didn't. So I guess they were my takeaways.
That's great. All of you, so valuable. Georgie, can I just really quickly, before I move on to, I'm going to do some individual questions in a moment, but I just wanted to, you did Pathways alum mentoring during your campaign. How valuable was that?
First of all, can I just ask, can you guys see me? Because I just got a notification that my video's asked to restart, and I've had it on the whole time.
That's weird. We can see you now, but we couldn't see you before.
Sorry, I wasn't meaning to make her off. Yes, I did participate in the mentoring program throughout the campaign experience, and it was something that was so beneficial to me. I was actually paired with Jenna Davey-Burns, who is a former Pathways alumni as well, obviously, and she's been elected at a council level now. So it was actually a really great pairing by Mem, because it seems a little bit odd because she's council and obviously I was running at a state level, but it just worked beautifully because we do things very similarly. We sort of run our campaigns and do our politics in similar ways, in the sense that, we try and be very authentic and ourselves, and also I guess, like not with major parties. So she was incredible too. I really relied on her with some difficult decisions I had to make throughout the campaign, and also just, I guess, smoothing over things about, you know, leaving a political office. I had this really difficult decision to make where I was working for an MP, and I obviously was going off to run a campaign myself. And even though I shouldn't feel it, I felt this immense guilt about leaving my job to go and run my own campaign when he was also recontesting the election as well. And I wanted to be able to do both things. I wanted to be able to help him, but I really wanted to be able to go out there and do something for myself too. So she was amazing at talking me through all the decisions I had to make, and also just being there and available, which I'm sure so many of you will be able to relate to just have a rant when you're being treated appallingly by the very fact that you're a woman, which is, you know, so many women in politics have to deal with. I guess just the abuse I'd get online, and, you know, the things that people would say to me. She was just always there for a check-in, to have a relatable conversation. And yeah, I got so much from it, and we're still in touch now. And yeah, I can't recommend the mentoring program enough.
Thank you. And thank you all for that. That's really, really interesting. I'm going to do some specific questions now. And Gaelle, I'm going to start with you. I'm really interested to hear about what it's been like establishing your team and your office in Northern Victoria. Where did you start? What were your priorities?
Look, that has certainly been a bit of a process. I guess Parliamentary Services do work to find the office. Like, as a member, you don't, they sort of more look after that. But I guess I was certainly keen to say, here's a whole lot of real estate agents. Then here's some, you know, some things that look good. So, but then, it is a big process. So it takes, it's taken a long time. I guess I first was sort of offered, office up at Wodonga, because you have some MPs leaving, so they look for vacant office, and I thought, well, that's 3 hours drive away, that's not ideal. And then offered one in Ballarat, and again I thought, well, that's not even in Northern Victoria, so preferably not. So we ended up, we've kind of hired a room, been using that as people have come on board, which has been very difficult, because you have, you know, a few people around a table all trying to make a call or something like that, and you've got to leave. So I thought, this, as much as you like the whole flexibility and working from home with a new team, it's good to get people together, and that's been challenging. But just last week, we moved into a temporary electorate office, I'm pleased to say, while they're still negotiating with a permanent office. So I said, we're on stage 2, you know, second base, we'll get there. And I think for the team too, they're enjoying being there at the start, and that kind of, perspective. But also, I think, look, floods have happened all across Northern Victoria. People in Rochester don't even have a home. You know, many of them, they're living in caravans. So I keep sort of just reminding our team, this is nothing. Like, this is first world problems here. So I guess it's just keeping that perspective in the process, and it does take time. There's a lot of security, different requirements that they look for in an electorate office now. Needs to have a car park, front, rear access, you know, different things. So meet certain standards. So they can't just sort of find it anywhere. They're looking for something fairly specific. And I guess as far as the team goes, I had to advertise. That was a priority sort of soon after the results to, again, there's a section of Parliament, like staff that work connected with Parliament. They're going to help you with that process. So, advertised. And then I guess I was looking for, real good attitude, passion for the region. Didn't have to be party political people at all, because they are very much serving the public. And as long as they can engage and connect with people, was key for me. And also, I guess, the skill set, just looking for complementary skills. So I've been very grateful for the team that have come on board, all part-timers in a way, because we were allocated 2.5 staff as far as full-time capacity goes. But I've got sort of people working together, which I think, good complement. And we're sort of, getting through, processes and developing as a new team, because I'd been managing a team that was pretty consistent for the last few years. So I thought, we're kind of beginning again in that regard, but it's been really enjoyable. process. So yeah, we're getting
Right,
there.
and you'll need the help with all that territory to cover too.
Very, very grateful.
Sarah, I'm really interested to hear from you about what you're most enjoying about being an MP and how it differs from your time on council.
Yeah, so I think for me, the really exciting thing has been being in a position where we've actually been able to influence policy and influence legislation. And, you know, the Greens have 4 upper house members now, and basically for the government to get anything through, they need 6 on the crossbench or 6 other, 6 other MPs basically to support something if there's a difference between, Labor and Liberals. And likewise, the Liberal National Party need 7 on the crossbench to get anything through. So we've got some power. And we've been able to use that, and it's been really exciting. So it was an incredibly sort of baptism by fire experience, but there was a piece of legislation that came through Parliament that landed in my portfolio area. So I was heavily involved in, I guess having to understand the legislation, get briefings from the department, engage with a whole range of different stakeholders, and a lot of that had to be proactive because a lot of them weren't even aware that this legislation was coming through. So there was a lot of reaching out to different groups who might be interested, and then going, actually, we think this legislation could be better, and having to negotiate amendments. And that process was really stressful, but really exciting. Like I can't tell you how exciting it was being part of that and actually having influence, and going, and, it wasn't, the outcome maybe wasn't what we, these things weren't necessarily what we would have come up with ourselves, but we had an opportunity to make something better. And similarly, I think we worked with the Liberals to, the Liberals and the Greens were going to put up a motion about a flood inquiry, looking at mainly about the flooding at the racecourse. But, we worked with them to expand the terms of reference to include some of the things we would have wanted. And then we were able to support the Liberals, flood inquiry that they put up. But again, it was, having some influence and being able to say, well, we have some power here and can make a difference. So that's been incredible.
Seat at the table.
Yeah, and it means something, and it's why you run. I mean, certainly for me, I wanted to be there to influence, to do things that I think, felt like I was making a positive difference in the community. And I think, and I guess being part of a party room where you hold sort of similar values and work as a team, that's probably been the biggest difference, that I've been able to do that work in a team environment surrounded by people who I think, you're a bit more supported, I think, by staff, but also by, your other MP colleagues. Like that has felt a bit different to that council environment where, again, you're there to influence things. And in some ways you have a bit more power as an individual, I guess, because you're one of however many and each vote counts. But, it's a different dynamic, I guess. And depending on where the numbers fall in a council level, you may, you can go through a whole term and have limited influence over things, or your influence is different, I guess. And you're not, certainly for me, I had allies on that council, but it's been very different being in a party room where, I guess, you may be a bit more closely aligned in terms of values. Like that's been a difference. And they're not, I don't want to, there's parts of being a councillor I miss, though. I do miss that sort of decision making that's much closer to the community, and the impacts feel a bit more immediate or a bit more tangible. Whereas the things we're negotiating, honestly, I went through that experience and it felt like I put my heart and soul into trying to negotiate amendments or work with the crossbench and do all these things. And no one had a clue, really. Like, apart from a few interested stakeholders, most people had no idea what had gone on. Whereas I think at that local government level, you feel just a bit closer to the impact of the decisions that you're making.
guess
So it's different, but yeah.
I
So
guess
one
at
would
that
say
level, it's really important to bring that experience, that I guess that more connected to the community experience to that chamber. I think that's really valuable.
I think it was definitely a really helpful experience going into state parliament. Like, I think the learning curve is steep, but it's not nearly as bad as it would have been. And even things like negotiating amendments, you're doing that a lot of the time when you're at council. You're negotiating with your other councillors to try and, especially if it's something you're putting forward or it's a position that the officers are putting forward that you support, you're out there trying to do all of that negotiation and working, but it's just a different dynamic.
Yeah.
So those skills work, but certainly that bringing that community perspective and the stakeholder engagement and all those things that you learn to do, I think really well when you're in local government, because you're out there having to talk to people and interact with them all the time. Being able to bring that into this environment has been important, but it just feels a bit different and possibly a little bit, I don't know. There's a bit of that real grassroots stuff I miss, I think already. But at the same time,
it's clearly a good fit for you, though. Like, you're clearly really enjoying it.
It feels exciting, and you go, well, this will be meaningful. This legislation will be meaningful, and it will make a difference to it will impact people's lives, but it'll be in a different way, and maybe one that's not as immediate as, that local government level.
It's interesting. Georgie, I wanted to hear about your experience of question time and like what it's like being there in the Legislative Council. Like, what's it been like so far?
Yeah. So I feel really lucky, as I mentioned, that I spent 4 years working as a political staffer. So I was able to get elected and really hit the ground running, because my former boss also was in the upper house in the state parliament. So I was much more familiar with the procedures and processes, and even the building itself, which is like difficult to navigate and learn when you get elected. But I still feel that nothing can truly prepare you for being there in that seat while the action is happening. And that was definitely my experience for my first question time. So as a crossbencher, I get to ask a question in question time. Not everyone gets to do it. Obviously, government MPs don't get to ask questions in question time. And it's one of our most important opportunities for the week, because you have the attention of everyone in the room. Everyone attends question time, whereas when usual debate is going on, often the chamber is like half full, even less. So you really want to make the most of those moments. But I will say that it can be, I'm sure Sarah and Gaelle can relate to this as well, there's moments where it can be particularly intimidating. And I certainly know that when I'm asking a question in relation to something that might be controversial, or there's going to be strong opinions on, you've got to be prepared to be heckled. And you don't notice this when you watch the live stream, because it only picks up the speaker's camera, but there's a lot of heckling that goes on in question time. And we talk a lot, I guess, about going into politics and needing to develop a thick skin, which I actually don't agree with for the most part. I think it's important to, have compassion and empathy in politics, but certainly you need to have a thick skin and learn to build up that confidence. And, as an introvert and someone who doesn't really love always being the center of attention, learning how to be a politician and putting yourself out there in situations like that has certainly been a struggle. So my first question was very scary. It was the day after my inaugural speech. So I'd literally only spoken in the chamber once before, but I feel like after a little bit of time, it sort of just becomes like clockwork, and you even get used to people yelling at you. So I'm loving question time, and feel really lucky that as a member of the crossbench that I get to participate in it.
And also, and just as a follow-up, I know that you're chairing the Legislative Council Economy and Infrastructure Committee. So what does that entail, and how are you navigating that along with everything else? Yeah,
so I feel very passionately about the staffing levels that get given to crossbenchers, because we have to have an input on a lot of different issues. And then obviously we have our own policies and our own agenda. And then of course there's committee work. So for those who aren't familiar with it, parliamentary committees operate outside of the sitting of Parliament, and we have inquiries come through to us that are often referred through the chamber or by other members of the committee through a committee meeting. And so I'm chairing the 3 committees in the upper house. I'm chairing one of them, which is economy and infrastructure, as Mem said. And my role in that is to, I guess, run the committee process and work with the secretariat, who are amazing from start to finish on all inquiries that come up. So lining up how long they're going to go for, the submission process for when the public can submit, and then the public hearing process where members of the public and organisations can come along and present and have their say to try and influence policy change and outcomes in Victoria. And then when the report is written as a chair, nobody sees the report and the draft report until it's gone through me. And I also run the committee hearings, so chairing them, whether that be just when the committee meets or when it's a public hearing, and I guess making sure everyone behaves and that no one's being silly and that everything's in line. So that's a very new role to me. I feel very lucky that I have previous board experience before being elected to Parliament through a range of different animal groups. So, you know, being a president of an organisation and running meetings and things like that has been very beneficial. But I am really enjoying it, but it is a lot of work, particularly when you're in the thick of an inquiry. And I accepted that role and took it on and put myself forward to be elected chair. And then, of course, the government announced they were going to have an inquiry into duck shooting in Victoria, which is one of my biggest issues. So I got put on that committee as well. So suddenly, you know, my diary half the time is committee work. So it's yeah, it's certainly been a challenge balancing everything and making sure that I'm doing all of my commitments properly.
That is really hitting the ground running, isn't it?
Yeah, sure is.
I'm going to ask one more question, and it's a question to you all, so that we've got some time for questions from the floor, so to speak. And it's a tricky one, because, you know, I think we all know that one of the really frightening realities of running for office as a woman in particular is the experience of social media vitriol. And Georgie, you marked International Women's Day this year by literally wearing some of the online harassment you've been subject to, donning a dress in Parliament House adorned with some of the tweets, emails and comments you've received since being elected. I wanted to, I mean, this is something that comes up a lot in the program. It comes up a lot in our alumni lunches. It's coming up all the time in the public sphere. So I'd just like to ask each of you how you manage it on a day-to-day basis, and what are some of the strategies you employ? Sarah, did you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. I think, look, I think I've kind of, I don't know if I've often questioned whether my attitude to this is the right one. And I you know, I really admire people who sort of take on the trolling or the vitriol and call it out. My approach has really been to, firstly, I set up, I probably don't have as big a presence on social media, partly because I do find it too vitriolic. Twitter's something I'm only recently dipping my toe in, but I just find it so revolting. So much of the comment, you know, I see the benefit of it, but you wonder if it's worth the emotional energy. So I'm starting to get involved in that, but I'm very cautious about some of the posting that I do. I'm careful I don't put my family on there. Everyone's like, oh, put your kids on all the time. I occasionally will make reference to them, but they can't, their faces aren't in it, their names aren't on it. I don't ever put my partner on there. You know, I'm really protective of what goes on there in the first place. I have profanity filters that, you know, I have an extensive list of words that can't be used to comment on my social media. And I have a pretty low threshold for hiding or blocking people, you know, hiding comments or blocking people. And I ignore stuff a lot. Like, I kind of take the attitude that, you know, like you treat a toddler, you know, bad behavior is best dealt with you know, not rewarding it with attention. And, you know, I'll give people a chance if you know, maybe it's a bit of an edgy attempt at engagement. I'll give them a chance if I'm not sure. But if it goes off piste and if it's really just about being abusive, then I just hide it. And it's amazing, a number of people that start off and you think, oh, is this going to be abuse or not? And they actually do engage, you know, if you give them a chance, and they're grateful for it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm often surprised by that. But yeah, I have a pretty low threshold. Now I'm mindful I have staff, and, you know, it's not just me that is wearing this. You know, I feel like as an elected MP, you don't sign up for this, but you're aware that you are a public figure and people will direct, you know, vitriol at you. And that's fine, you know, at some level, but for your staff, I don't think that's, you know, I'm really mindful of what they have to put up with. So again, I've kind of gone, you do not have to, you know, if you're finding things offensive, do not feel you have to engage with it. You don't have to see it, you know. Yeah, I'm really mindful of protecting them. And it's not just social media, to be honest. Some of the worst stuff I get is still via email, or, you know, other forms of contact, phone calls and that sort of thing. But email in particular, like, people will write the most horrific things. And it's the same thing when I was a counsellor. You just start to get these awful emails, and people who sort of half are engaging you on issues, but they really just are having a go at you. And that can become tricky. But again, I just have a low threshold for saying, look, I acknowledge receipt of your email, but, you know, I won't be responding to this, or, you know,
really clear boundaries.
You have to set boundaries. I've had to. So yeah, that's how I've dealt with it.
Yeah. What about you, Gaelle?
Look, I would say I'm keen to sort of hear from Georgie on this one, because I know she's probably had more experience of that. And when I'm sort of met with parliamentary security early on, they talked about, you know, the risks, and they kind of put the Nationals right down. Like, so I was like, okay, that's interesting. But yeah, look, I think it is unfortunate that it can happen. Yeah, being respectful, I think, is crucial. But I guess I just sort of feel like, yes, we see it in politics, but I mean, my daughter works at a restaurant, and she deals with pretty bad behaviour amongst patrons on a regular basis too. So I think we all understand that there are people out there that don't have very good filters, don't know how to control themselves very well, and just, I guess, not taking that on board. Like, it's them, it's a reflection on them. And so I guess I just sort of focus on what I can control, not what I can't control. And I guess being respectful, to others is something that's always been important to me. And but yeah, not being able, not engaging with it, just sort of putting the boundaries in place and making sure that your team are aware of what your boundaries are and what your expectations are. But just to focus on your own team and your culture and supporting one another in that. But it's just a sad reality of today, and these tools that can be so fantastic, but they can also be terrible as well. And it is very direct, I guess, when you read things, it can be quite direct. But I think, like Sarah, sort of being mindful of what you put on there, and what you post, when you post, all that sort of thing. But Georgia may have a bit more experience of that, because my social media profile is not very huge, and I think probably the spelling of my name makes it even harder for people to find me. So anyway, but over to you, Georgie.
Yeah, so I guess on what Gaelle said, I'm sort of on the other end of the spectrum in terms of when I met with parliamentary security, they had significant concerns about me when I got elected. So my office is open by appointment only. It's not a walk-in office. And I can see now, only 5 months in, the reasons for that decision. I think my online abuse, I would just want to say from the outset, is like on steroids because of my past. So I obviously have a bit more of a colourful past than former than other politicians, and people like to use that and weaponize it against me. I think that when you enter public life, I strongly believe, and in fact expect, people to disagree with me and debate me on my policy and, go as hard as you want on that. But that's where it should start and end. For me, it unfortunately doesn't. And, you know, it is every single day on every single platform. I get awful, horrific messages, sometimes to the point of threats, which are obviously dealt with and reported, but it's mostly just ongoing abuse and slurs. And I sort of take the opposite approach, as Mem mentioned. I call it out, and the reasons for that is that I think that when you become a politician, many people feel like they own you, and yes, you represent them, but they don't own you. And I think that by doing what they're doing, and obviously important to say this, the majority of people that do this to me are men, and they do it because they want to make me small, and they want to make me question myself, and they want me to, you know, I guess lose my confidence. And it's important for me to show them that that is not going to happen. And surprisingly, since I started doing that, I've actually had some apologies from people that have
wow,
said
that's
those
interesting.
things. Yeah, said those things to me. And I think when you, you know, shoot off a message online or send someone a nasty tweet, it's very easy to forget there's a real person at the other end of that. And it's important for me to show these men that I'm a real person, that I'm not Teflon, that I have feelings. I expect them to disagree with me, but they need to do it in a way that's respectful and, you know, not a direct attack on who I am or how I look or, you know, my age or anything like that. And I just really strongly reject that this is part of being a woman in public life. And I've spoken about this before. There is a lot more that can be done at a legislative level, and what the Parliament can do to support women, and also staff, as was mentioned, but also we need that broader, I guess, societal change and education on people love to hate politicians, and I understand like we're the most, you know, hated profession, and, you know, people don't trust us, but it still doesn't make it okay for them to treat us this way. So yeah, I guess calling it out has worked for me, but in terms of managing it, like my staff are amazing. Like they're all young women as well, and completely understand, you know, how horrific it is. I have other people help me with my social media now, which has greatly relieved the mental distress that it was causing me. So comments will be hidden, messages will be deleted before I even see them. They save them all, and if there's one that's like particularly nasty, or because sometimes I can laugh about it, it depends what state of mind I'm in. They'll always check with me, are you in a state of mind to laugh at something right now, or is it going to affect you? And they'll often send me the things that have come through. And I have pretty strict boundaries around Twitter, as Sarah mentioned. Twitter has value, but it doesn't have enough value for me to use it regularly for the mental distress that comes with using Twitter. So I have my social media platforms that are my safe spaces. They're not completely safe, but Instagram, Facebook, you know, that's where I feel most comfortable and less, I guess, unsafe when I'm in the digital world. So yeah, we've got some good, I guess, plans in place in terms of how we manage it. And Parliament security are amazing if you get anything particularly concerning, and they have dealt with a few matters for me, which has been great.
Yeah, and it's really important that you know, raise that issue that this requires structural change as well as it requires resilience. You know, I mean, we of course it really requires resilience, and you know it's so helpful to hear from you all, because I think this is something that, you know, most women in the program are the most scared of. So it's really important to hear from you, but and that resilience and thinking about boundaries is so important. But as you say, Georgie, that structural change is very important too. It can't be all on you. But I think that's enough of me. I'd like to open up questions from the floor. How much time have we got, Sarah?
Let's say about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So we can take a few questions for sure. And raise your virtual hand. And while you're thinking about that and raising your virtual hands, can I just say a really heartfelt thank you to the three of you for making the time tonight for such an interesting conversation. and also just how incredibly proud I certainly am of you all, but you know, how proud everyone at Pathways is of you.
Mem, there was a question in the chat from Michelle about bullying of female candidates. I was just going to say on that, there's a parliamentary inquiry happening right now on the state election and particularly the dealings of some things that went on. And I know the treatment of volunteers and candidates is something that they're looking into. So if anyone has a perspective to share in relation to that, and if you do too, Michelle, it will be very worthwhile putting a submission in, because the Electoral Matters Committee is considering exactly that right now. Yeah, I really expected this to happen, because I think we look at Parliament, particularly federally, of all the things that have gone on and some really horrific treatment of women in that space that we expected to happen in our state parliament too. And I've obviously spent the 4 years in there prior to getting elected myself. And I can say, it's obviously early days, that I have really felt a sense of camaraderie and relatively good treatment among everyone in there. And I just think it's really important to note that there has been that significant, I guess, change in gender makeup in the parliament recently. And I think across the board, no matter what party we are representing, and, you know, for example, Gaelle and I are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the issues we're advocating for in many ways, but we treat each other with respect. We, you know, we're nice to each other. And I have that relationship with most people in the parliament at the moment. I imagine as it gets a little bit further on in the piece, that can change. But I feel a really big change in this parliament in particular about, I guess, it does feel like a safe place for me most of the time. And I really felt like that being young is something that I often question about my capabilities and whether people are going to take me seriously. And I actually have not, I haven't felt that. And the age demographic has changed this parliament too. So I don't know if Sarah and Gaelle are going to say the opposite of me, but it's very different to, I guess, the ideas that we have in our heads and how parliament's portrayed, particularly Canberra, in my experience.
That's good to hear. What about Gaelle, Sarah? What about your experience?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to go speak to that as well. But, you know, I totally agree, Georgie, in terms of, I mean, personally, I guess I do want to get along well with the other MPs, regardless of what side they're on, because it's about the policy and debate of ideas, and that's what democracy is. And so, and then people get a say in that process. So I kind of think you bring your best to the table, you make your case, do your research, put your time in, and present that, and then let the process take its course. But yeah, I ran up. I remember crossing the traffic lights because there was a Labor guy there, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Gaelle," and what's your name, in order to meet him, because I thought if I don't, it was good to have a chat on the way into Parliament, and you think otherwise you don't always get a whole lot of opportunities to engage with people other than in the chamber. But one thing that I experienced, and this is early on. I wanted to speak on this particular issue, and I'd met with a local community group, and I was very passionate about it, and I'd done, research, and I really cared about, what I was going to speak on. And then when I started speaking, there ended up a conversation going on in the chamber of 3 different MPs right near where I was speaking, and it was really disconcerting, because it was one of my first speeches apart from the maiden speech where everyone's quiet, and then this was like full-on conversation, and all I was thinking is, I'm really like wanting to do well by this group and respect them, but then I was thinking, is the audio going to be just full of this other conversation? And I think it was maybe Georgie pointed out earlier that the mic doesn't actually pick up all of that, so you don't, like, when I listened back, I was like, oh, thank goodness, because then I could share that and advocate for them, and they were really appreciative of that. But I thought, in my mind, as you're speaking, you're sort of very conscious of the surround, so you do adapt to that very quickly and realize it is pretty noisy in the background. Just keep going, because you just need to sort of respect the people that you're there representing. But I'm not one to do a whole lot of interjecting or anything, because I guess I've had such a different, like your background at work. You just wouldn't do that. I certainly in the bank there was no heckling. I mean, you might disagree, but you don't sort of jump in and have a go. So I don't know, maybe I'll hope I stay the same way. I don't know if it'll change me over the next few years.
I can't imagine you changing, Gaelle.
No, that I think everyone just needs to sort of have their opportunity to point, and thankfully we have a president and we have time limits often too, so that helps.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think as the others have said, I mean, the upper house at the moment is relatively civil. I think, there's a bit of banter especially during question time, but it's almost a bit of a pantomime, some of it. Like it doesn't feel really vitriolic most of the time. That could change, and I can see how that, dynamic could shift, but I think our dynamic isn't too bad. I know for some of my lower house colleagues, that is not the case. It has been really hostile and difficult. So it isn't, it's not a Victorian Parliament thing. It may be a House thing, and it may just be the makeup of our House at the moment. It's just, I certainly wouldn't say that it's completely gone from Parliament, but it's, I think there is a bit of respect, at the moment anyway. Everyone understands that. I guess maybe that's something with everyone having a bit of power. We've all got a role to play, and we're all useful up there. That could be part of it, but I'm not sure why the dynamic's so different in the different houses. But certainly for some of my colleagues in the lower house, it's been, they've been on the end of some pretty awful I guess.
I don't know why they're so grumpy. They don't even have to do the long hours, and they're feeling it.
I know. So it's just it's a different environment there, but it's one thing I would like to just sort of say, it's been really lovely. Juliana Addison, who's actually in the lower house, and someone I didn't know, came and found me one evening in my office and was like, I was in Pathways. Different parties. She came down to our end. We're all in our different ends in our annex. We've got our little office areas, and said no, but she was meeting Carol Schwartz, and her chamber was going to be sitting longer than she thought. She said, would you mind coming and having a cup of tea with Carol just while I'm still in Parliament? She said, I knew you were in Pathways, and so I know that's a little example, but I think knowing Gaelle was in Pathways and Georgie, it kind of it's another connection we have as well that I think actually makes a difference. And having quite a few of us in there that have all been through the program, I don't know, I think things like that help to break down. Like, it's very hard to then get up and heckle someone. I'm not really a heckler either, but if I was, it'd be much harder to do if I had a connection with people in some other way.
I have to say, please jump in, Sarah Buckley, that was always part of Carol's vision. It was like, if in the process of being together as a cohort and having that commonality, if that can go somewhat through the program, if that can go to some way towards improving that culture, our work here
Carol will be delighted by that. I mean, it's very meaningful. It's about how do we do politics differently and do it with respect, and as we sort of talked about, debate the policy, not the person. And I love the thought that you're all there and fostering that, and that's only going to grow over time. It's very powerful.
Really moving. Well, on that that cuddly note, I think we should probably call it a night, Sarah.
Yeah, I think that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, what a great conversation. And again, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, and thanks for joining us. And we'll be doing a few more of these this year, so stay tuned for that.